Good afternoon, everyone. It's my honor to welcome you all to this afternoon's event with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. I'll say a few words about the Buckley program and then introduce our guest, and then I'll turn it over to him. The William F. Buckley Jr. program is an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity and open political discussion on Yale's campus. We've hosted lectures, dinner seminars, flying line debates, and an annual conference each year since 2011. Our over 500 Buckley Fellows hold a wide range of political beliefs, but they all stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber on campus. By providing Yale students with a forum to engage meaningfully with serious conservative thought, the Buckley program has become an institution on Yale's campus and a symbol for a more open and more representative political atmosphere. Especially at a university where the mission is the cultivation and creation of new knowledge, Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith. You can learn more about the program and how to become a fellow on our website at buckleyprogram.com. Now for our guest. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger is the CEO and owner of Tendon Systems, LLC. Tendon is a specialty contracting and engineering design firm with nearly 150 employees. The firm has operated in 35 different states. Raffensperger also owns and operates a specialty steel manufacturing plant in Forsyth County. Additionally, he served two terms in the Georgia General Assembly from 2015 to 2019. Brad Raffensperger earned a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Western University and was awarded his MBA from Georgia State University. He is a licensed professional engineer in over 30 states. Brad and his wife, Tricia, have been married for 42 years and live in Johns Creek, Georgia. Brad is a member of North Point Community Church. Now we'll hear some brief opening remarks from Secretary Raffensperger. I'll ask a few questions, then we'll turn it over to you all for questions from the audience. Please join me in welcoming Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Glad to be here. I've been traveling all over the state of Georgia for probably about 2 years now, really telling people about what happened in the election of 2020. I don't know if anyone remembers what happened in 2020, but for over 25 years, Georgia has always voted Republican for their presidential races. And all of a sudden, when we had 2020, President Trump came up short. And people are wondering what's happening, and they're still asking today, what exactly happened? And so I can save a lot of time here, and I'm going to tell you exactly, in a nutshell, here's what happened. 24,000 people skipped the presidential race. They didn't vote for a single person, and yet they voted down ballot for the other races. The Republican congressmen in the state of Georgia collectively received 33,000 more votes than President Trump. And that's why President Trump came up short. Now, after we had the race for 2020, and it was a shock to our system, all of a sudden there was all these conspiracy theories that had been spun up. And I'm not going to answer all your questions, but if you ask one about conspiracy theory number 1, 2, or 20, or 50, I have an answer for you on that. But suffice to say, at the end of the day, he came up short. But they also said that there was 10,000 dead people that voted. We found 2 back in 2021, 2020, that era time, and we found 2 more for a total of 4. That was it, the total number of dead people. So there aren't thousands of dead people voting in Georgia. They said that there were 66,000 underage voters in Georgia. But guess what? Georgia is actually, very unique. We allow people to register when you're 17 and a half. And as long as you turn 18 by election day, your vote counts. And guess what? We checked out every one of those people that were alleged to have voted underage. Every one of them checked out, and they all were 18 by election day. And so we wanted to make sure that people had confidence that. They said that there was thousands of felons that voted. They said there's over 2,050 felons. We found just less than 76 that were still under felony sentence. Here's again, I just want to point out, some people have some misconceptions about Georgia. If you serve, you get a prison sentence of, say, 10 years to serve 5. As soon as you serve your time of 10 years, not when you're on probation and all that, then your rights are restored. And that goes back several years. We checked out that and we found just less than 74 were still under felony sentence. And then As it related, they said there's 2,400 non-registered voters. We checked out every one of them. There was not a single one. Every allegation that we checked out never proved out. Has anyone ever heard of State Farm Arena and what that means? I didn't know if you were following it that close, but this man obviously did. But State Farm Arena, that's where the Atlanta Hawks play basketball. That's where they win some games and they lose some games. Wish they would win more than they've lost. But what happened there is that's where they're doing the absentee ballot counting. And what people said is that there's ballot stuffing going on there. And the reason they say that is that this was under video surveillance the whole day. And a fellow named Rudy Giuliani came down to Georgia, a state Senate meeting, and he then showed portions, snippets of that tape. And he said, see right here? See how they have ballots here and they're pulling them out of the table and now they're counting them. And he alleged that what would have happened, they were counting these ballots twice or they were stuffing ballots. But after that hit Fox News at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 10 o'clock, do you know why I know that it hit Fox News at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 10 o'clock? I'm in the construction business. And I don't know if everyone in this room is a conservative or if you're a Republican, but trust me, in our construction industry, it just happens that most people are on this side of the aisle, my side of the aisle. My phone was getting blown up by all my friends who watch Fox News. What is this all about? And before we could get the real message out, that had gone around the world probably 7 times, if not 70. But what actually happened is those absentee ballots, if you look at, they were absentee ballot storage boxes. And it was under video surveillance for 24/7. You can see that they bring in these big storage boxes, they open them up, and it's empty. They close it and zip tie them, and they brought them in. People say, why were they there? Well, because in case they didn't actually scan and count all those ballots that night, they'd have a place to store them. So they wheeled them in, put them underneath the tables. And if you would have looked at the back wall, there was thousands and thousands of absentee ballots. They thought that they were done at about 10:20, 10:25 at night. And so what did they do? They started pulling them out. We found out about that. They were quitting so early, probably about 10:40, and we said, why are they doing that? They need to go back to working. And so the county election director told them, hey guys, you need to go back to working. But what he didn't realize is that they already had pulled some out, they put them underneath there for storage. Now they're pulling them out again. And what got then transposed in this conversation that Rudy Giuliani had with the state senators is that, see, they were stuffing those ballots, but they weren't. Those were the very same ballots, they hadn't been scanned yet. Now, one thing that did happen, and there's probably no excuse for it, but the observers from both parties left and never came back the rest of the night. And because our observer that we had, who are post-certified, they weren't there for about 50 minutes before they got back and said, hey, they're back there working. You need to get back there. And that period of time, it was still under video surveillance. So what did we do? We had an investigation. We called in our investigators. We called in the GBI. And we also called in the FBI. And I was talking to a Tea Party group when I said we called in the FBI. And guess what they yelled out back to me? You can't trust the FBI. And I get it. There's not a lot of trust in a lot of our organizations this day. So I asked this fellow, though, okay, I understand you don't trust the FBI, don't trust the GBI, and you certainly don't trust our investigators. If President Trump could pick someone to actually look into that, he gets to pick who that person is. Would you trust what they came up with? And they said, yeah. Well, guess what? I would too. And he goes, yeah, good for you. Did you know that President Trump actually did that? And that's one of the untold stories of the 2020 election myths. Because President Trump brought in the U.S. Attorney of the Southern District from Savannah, came up to Atlanta when he replaced the U.S. Attorney of the Northern District who had resigned. That was the first thing he looked at. And I pulled up his quote and I put it in my book, Integrity Counts, because he said, we thought there'd be something there. And he found that there was nothing there and he just dismissed it. So we've been out there really talking to groups of people, and I've had the opportunity to talk to Tea Party groups, Republican Party groups, but I've talked to some of the most special people in America. And if you ever get out in the business world, I'd encourage you to join that group, and that group are called Rotarians. They're like the Kiwanis groups, but Rotarians group. You know why the Rotarian groups are so good? They got a 4-way test. And their 4-way test is, first of all, number one, is it the truth? Can I ask you a question? Anyone here does not believe in the truth? Can you give me a show of hands? Good. See, that's why I have great hope in America. You believe in the truth, and so do I. Number two, the question is it beneficial to everyone? If you're actually looking out for the goodwill of all the group, do you all think that's a good idea? I do, and I think you do too. And so we'll build goodwill and good relationships. And what they do is they kind of set aside, when they walk into the Rotary, they set aside their politics, they set aside all these other things that can separate people. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from Eastern Connecticut. Oh, you're Yale. So you're from all over the country. We probably have 50 different states represented here. They don't get into stuff that separates them. They say, what can we do? What can we unify on? And so they focus on those common interests. And they have focused on defeating polio, and they've accomplished it. And you've got to give a big shout out to that. They also said, now we're going to tackle human sex trafficking. We've got to stop it. It's an evil thing. And they're working with law enforcement, working with groups to stop human sex trafficking. Whatever they set their mind to do, they accomplish it. And I think that maybe our U.S. Congress should do that every morning. Imagine if they read the four-way test. Is it the truth? Every morning before they start session, is it the truth? Will it bid goodwill? Because you have people on both sides of the aisle, but let's work together for the people. And I think you all be happier, and the average American out there would be a whole lot happier too. And so that's kind of what we've been dealing with. But we also you have to understand that what I just talked to is, if any of you people had voted for President Trump, or your parents have, I may have, kind of irritated you a little bit because I wasn't talking in your good ear. You are really a believer in what we believe in, those conservative principles. And this is where I offend the other half of the aisle, because you need to hear the truth. Because when I took the office back in January 2019, I already had 9 lawsuits. 9 lawsuits when I took office from Stacey Abrams, the losing candidate for governor of the Democrat Party. She lost by 55,000 votes. And her lawsuits were all based on the myth of voter suppression. 4 years later, it was the myth of a stolen election claim. But what both of those do is they really start tearing apart our social fabric. And I don't think that's healthy for America, because neither one of them were supported by the facts. It took 4 years. All those lawsuits that we got from Stacey Abrams' group, Fair Fight, Fair Count, New Georgia Project, all those lawsuits, it finally got to a court, and the judge said, none of this is supported by the facts. We want on every single count. And just like all the allegations made after the 2020 race, none of them ever got and never mustered through a court of law. Do we have anyone here that's in law school? Anyone here? There we go. Good for y'all. And the truth is worth something, isn't it? It's worth everything. And so people ask me, what did I do? I really didn't do much, folks. I was just asked if I could find some more votes. We already checked it out. And I followed the law, and I followed the Constitution. And you all are going to have that challenge. Someday you're going to have to make choices. And I look back at my life, and I didn't make the right choices all the time, particularly sometimes when I was a teenager. And my dad would help correct me on these issues. And now you're in college, and you can make choices. But a lot of times you have a good friend. They say, are you sure you want to do that? And that's really good that you have someone that comes alongside you, and we kind of each hold each other accountable. Accountability is a good thing. But we have a great country. We have a wide divergence of opinions, but it's a great country, and never doubt that. We sometimes are never as strong as we think we are, but we're never as weak as we say we are, because it's a great country. But we continue to lean into the rule of law, our Constitution, and we continue to make this just a little bit better. And we'll continue to progress if we all just make sure that we follow the rule of law. Whatever we're challenged to do, make sure you just kind of look down that line. And so that's kind of where we are today right now. I want to keep it brief so I can take as many questions as you want. I guess we get them first from our leader here, and so we'll take that, and then hopefully if you have questions, I'm more than happy to take all those.
Yeah, well, Secretary Raffensperger, thank you so much for coming. I guess I'll start with something I'm sure you get asked quite often, but I wonder what you make of the short and medium-term future of the Republican Party, especially given that just last year you defeated a Trump-endorsed primary challenger? What do you see in the future of the GOP, and do you think that he will continue to wield a lot of influence in the party?
Well, this dates me, but our great model for the last great conservative Republican push was Ronald Reagan, 1980. When we all born, 2000, in the 2000s. He had been dead for how many years? Like, he had finished his term, so it kind of like, that's when I was a little kid. They're talking about FDR. He was dead 10 years before I was born. But that was a great model. But before Reagan could get where he was, there was a Bill Buckley. And Bill Buckley was a voice in the wilderness. He says, I got some great ideas. What is it? It's actually Lincoln Republicanism. We've got a great party, great values. This is good stuff. We're going to empower people to be more and to do more. And Reagan said, hey, that is great stuff, and it fits with my message, and look what Reagan did. But what Reagan did is he represented our values, and he built a great coalition. So what we really have to do as Republicans is build another coalition, a coalition of your generation. Because the generation that's a little bit ahead of me, eventually it moves off the stage. And my generation will move off the stage. You'll be the generation that takes the stage. It'll be your opportunity to lead. But I think we can really rebuild it. But it has to be built on integrity. It has to be built on character. It has to be built on civil discourse. We have to be able to talk to both sides of the aisle. It has to be taught with, basic decency and honesty. Those values are eternal. And we build it on that. And then I think really the principle is going all the way back to Lincoln, going back to George Washington. We don't need a king. We need someone to represent us to get the will of the people done. And both parties right now, so you know, are sifting for the next generation leadership. And both parties haven't found that yet. And the first party does is going to run the tables for the next 40 years. And I think it's going to be our party. We just haven't got there yet. But it may take a voice in the wilderness, a Bill Buckley, out there, the next one that is really saying, these are some great policies. This is great. And you get excited about it. And you see some vision. Because without a vision, the people perish. We need vision. Any company in America starts with a vision. Anything that has ever been really done well starts with a vision. This university started with a vision. What you want to do in your life will start with your vision. And so coming together with our common vision, we can move forward.
Yeah, I think I'll just ask another 2 questions maybe and then turn it over. But another thing, I think some people, especially those on the left, will point to our federal elections, and especially those elections where the victor loses the popular vote but wins the Electoral College, and these people will call for some sort of extreme changes to our electoral system, maybe even something like abolishing the Electoral College. How do you respond to these people and their concerns?
I believe in the Electoral College because it really is. I respect the wisdom of the founders, and I know that not everything that they did was perfect, but we've had a lot of amendments that continue to perfect that. But the advantage of the Electoral College is that way, anyone that runs for president has to run in all 50 states. And so even though Rhode Island and some of these other, Wyoming, don't have a lot of electoral votes, you still have to try and get those. Obviously, California has a lot, Texas, Florida, but it really means that you have to have a national campaign instead of just camping out in the cities with the major metropolitan centers. So I think it's very healthy that conversation is nationwide. And so, no, that's not the way it should be. But also, people have concerns. In fact, if you do any reading about elections, people sometimes wonder, what happens in that state? But it was really decided in the Constitution that the state legislatures in the various states would set these rules. So if you don't like the rules in some states, and I don't like some of the rules in some states, you can try and get what you have. In Georgia, if you want to vote, it's photo ID. Photo ID for absentee voting, photo ID for in-person early, photo ID for election day voting. Photo ID does not suppress any vote. I have peer-reviewed studies. They're in my bottom desk drawer. I pull them out for everyone that says it does. We've proven it doesn't. We've had record turnout for the last 3 election cycles. We have record registrations. But what does it actually do? It gives you security. By giving you security, it's giving you confidence. Then you know that whoever showed up to vote, that was actually who they said they were. Now do you feel more confident about that? But if someone can just show up. So if it's state by state, then you can work on the states. And if you don't like what some states do, then you try and minimize that by encouraging the turnout in the states where you can win. But I think photo ID is very important, but also like our elections are state by state, the Electoral College is really a collection of states. And that's why I believe in the strength and the stability of the Electoral College.
And then I have maybe a more personal question, which you briefly touched on in your opening remarks. I think that putting yourself at odds with President Trump, especially as a Republican in the state of Georgia, requires a deal of moral courage. I wonder how, in what ways has your life changed since then?
Well, every once in a while, several times, my wife Trish and I will be out in our back porch by the pool eating, barbecue or having dinner evenings, and we just really enjoy, because the decision I made, I can have dinner with my wife instead of cooling my heels in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. And so, and that's why you make the right decision. But you have to understand, this is just something that I did. But what about the people that have been shipped overseas, that have given their life for our freedom? What do we owe them? I think we owe them a lot. And really, so that's all we're called to do, is just do your job. And then you honor those people that have sacrificed. People that have come back recently without a leg, with a bad back, without an eardrum. People that have lost their lives. So it's just really doing the right thing. And sometimes it's not easy, and the repercussions are not pleasant. But at the end of the day, you can look in the mirror. I can look at my wife, and this is really important. Maybe not to y'all yet, but I can look at my kids, and our family's whole. And if I would have made the wrong decision, it would have been tough. And I brought my kids up a certain way. My dad brought me up that same way. And so just think about, you'll have tough decisions you may have to make. Some of you folks are getting MBAs, I heard. You may have some challenging questions someday. No, follow the law. Do the right thing. Say, no, can't do that. We got to do this. And you're going to have those tough decisions, particularly as you move, in your careers to higher levels of influence and power, wherever you're situated. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about making a new vision for the conservatism in America. And so my question is, where does that come from, right? Does it come from Fox News? Does it come from, the people? Does it come from Matt Gaetz? Is it Tucker Carlson? How does someone as a young person really make that change in conservatism in America? And do you have to fight against the already existing structures to kind of make something new? If maybe there's a tendency of Congress people to kind of follow what maybe the media outlets are telling their constituents and not really reflect even what they might believe might be the best vision.
When our new philosophy starts winning in states that we haven't won in, then it's going to be an irrefutable force. Success breeds success. And so we got to decide what we want to look at. But I think that one of the things in Georgia, we always talk about, Georgia's been the best place to have a business 9 years in a row. But it's not the idea that it's the reason that that's so important. It's not because we just want business to do well. We want business to do well because if business do well, the people that work for the business do well. That's the bottom line. It's really that people's financial futures are improved, that people have careers. And that's why it's really important that we have a strong economic climate, that we live within our means. And we can do that. We do it at the state level. We have a balanced budget. In fact, we had a surplus. So we're going to look at where we can do some special one-year expenses, some investments, and then also what can we do to give that back to the taxpayers. But we have a lot of great ideas. We just have to pull out Reagan 101. Maybe read Peggy Noonan's book, When Character Was King. That's a great story about Ronald Reagan. read some of Bill Buckley's thoughts and philosophies. I believe that government has a role. Our job as government should be run like the free market. From the standpoint, it should be efficient. Did you know in the original Constitution that we're actually charged to have post roads, which means toll roads, so turnpikes, and post office? Why didn't someone fix the post office? That would be a good start. And I think that's going to be the next movement, is that we have to have government actually start working on reforming itself. Student loans, things like that. There's a lot of reform that has to happen within the government.
Well, politics has always been a bit of a dirty game, but it feels like in the last, 10 years or so, it's gotten significantly dirtier, significantly more polarized. And for a lot of young people, we've been feeling, very disillusioned with the whole process. How did it get to this point?
Who's got a big family, goes on family vacations in the car, and all of a sudden, you're fighting, but how'd you get there? Well, he touched me first, or she touched me first, and next thing, and it's middle school behavior. And they're working in Congress, the greatest deliberative body in the world. And they just need to pretend until they can fake it till you make it. Pretend that you are in the greatest deliberative body in the world, and just don't respond in kind. Elevate your behavior. And sometimes you want to respond, but it's not helpful for our society. And so I read Peter Drucker. Anyone in business knows that he's one of the greatest financial leaders. He has an essay called Managing Oneself. Boy, that'll keep me busy every day. And I figure if I pay attention to myself, that would work. And everyone has to do it on an individual basis, because we can't police other people. All we can do is police ourselves. I wish I had an easier answer, but it is what it is.
So shortly after the November general election in 2022, I believe you and Gabe Sterling both came out in favor of Saturday voting for the runoff election, and then a couple days later, your office specifically prohibited Saturday voting. My question is, why that turn, or why that flip? And then the follow-up is, do you think failure to mandate Saturday voting depressed rural turnout and harmed Herschel Walker's electoral chances?
It's a good question. Gabe Sterling and I are not lawyers, and so when it went through our legal counsel, Attorney General's office, they found out that, lo and behold, the day after Thanksgiving is a state holiday. And you cannot have things the day after a state holiday, which meant Saturday was precluded. Now, then all of a sudden it got adjudicated by the Superior Court and said, no, that's not true. And so that's where it got settled. So we ended up having Saturday voting. But that was the mishmash going around. And what I've told the General Assembly, I've said that we need to get rid of runoffs. People during Thanksgiving, you're home from college, you wouldn't want to have to worry about voting, and your parents don't want to have to worry about voting. And if you're an election director, you want to enjoy the weekend too. It's family time. So I said, let's get rid of runoffs. But if we don't get rid of runoffs, we need to then codify in law exactly what that is. Do you have it Friday and Saturday, and that's just what it is? Or do you go to different options? But that's really what happened that year. Did it hurt Herschel Walker? No, we had strong turnout everywhere. It was really, at the end of the day, he didn't come in first place in November, and he didn't come in first place. It was close, but it's not close enough.
Good afternoon, sir. My question's pretty simple. You suddenly earned the ability to make any single amendment to the Constitution. Which amendment would you add? How would you amend it?
I'd really have to give that some thought. Amending the Constitution, well, first of all, it goes through the people and the states. And so I think it really requires really a deep thought about that. And so I'd have to think about that. So let me think about that, and I'll get back to you in 6 months.
Thanks for being here, Mr. Secretary. Back in December, as part of the omnibus, Congress passed the Electoral Count Reform Act, which has to do, at least in part, with how states certify their electoral slates. I was just wondering how the state of Georgia is responding to that bill and whether or not you think it's a good law.
I support that once we do our work. You have to understand, what happens in Georgia, a little bit different than Connecticut. Most states, the counties run the elections. In Connecticut, it's the cities and towns that run elections. But the counties run the elections. They report their results up to us. And what we really are is oversight and then really a clearinghouse to say, this is what we got in Appling County, this is what we got, down in Paulding County, and from A to Z, all 159 counties. And then we go ahead, we verify everything, and then we certify it. Then the governor gets our certification, and then he certifies it. It's a process. And so the Electoral Act has really been a formality when they meet. It's already been decided that for the presidential race, it's either going to be one slate, the slate for the Republican for this state or the Democrat. And so is something that has been long-standing for well over 100 years. Actually, what I would really welcome our federal government to do if they want to stick their nose into elections is I would like them to fix NVRA 1993. And what do I mean by that? When we passed, the U.S. Congress passed, they introduced and passed this with a Democrat House, Democrat Senate, and President Bill Clinton, NVRA. And one of the things in it says you cannot update the voter rolls 90 days before an election. And that may have worked in 1993, but it does not work today. Why does it not work today? Because Pew did a study, and the Pew study showed that 11% of all Americans move every year. We have 7.5 million people in Georgia that are registered. Times 0.1 is 800,000 people. And 90 days of 800,000 people is what? 200,000 people. That means in that 90 days, you could potentially have 200,000 people moving in the state, out of the state, out of the county, in the county, out of the precinct. It's just so much dynamic mobility that we have. And yet we cannot update our voter rolls. And when you can't update your voter rolls and you have this dynamic mobility, what that does is you don't have as much accuracy, but it also hurts the confidence because people want to know that those people really do live where they still live. And so that's one thing that the federal government could do, and they haven't addressed it.
Now, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I looked up and I couldn't find anywhere where you had given an affirmative or negative on whether you would support Trump if you were the Republican nominee in 2024. So my question for you is if you would rule that out or you'd be open to it. And a follow-up is, and it depends on your answer, but why do you think so many Republicans have been nervous to criticize Donald Trump? For example, the majority of the House Republican Conference in 2021 voted to, overturn the election, to steal the election. I mean, why are no Republicans standing up for this guy? But what's your answer on supporting him?
Done right, the office of Secretary of State, as it relates to elections, is really nonpartisan. Our job is just to follow the law and follow the Constitution. And because I oversee all the elections in the state of Georgia, I don't endorse anyone. And back in 2020, I did not endorse my nominee. And it was only after 2020 that I let people know that I voted for President Trump, obviously 2016, 2020. But I don't get into future elections. I did bend my rule one time last year, and I said I'm supporting my governor. Because after 2020, my governor and myself did our job. We follow the law, we follow the Constitution, and that's to be honored. As it relates to other people, all I can do is control myself. And I'm responsible to you for doing the right thing. And like I said, I've been married over 40 years to Tricia. I can look at her, and I can look at my kids, and that's worth an awful lot. They're going to have those decisions late in life. And someday, when they're old, sitting in the rocking chair, their grandkids are going to be asking, what did you do back in 2021? We'll see what they have to say about it.
So I have a question that's, I guess, kind of similar to Tasha's question from earlier, but kind of looking towards the future. She mentioned how like our generation is kind of disillusioned with politics. So I'm curious what you think is the way that we restore faith in our institutions. You talked about back when Stacey Abrams ran for governor, the left kind of went crazy after she didn't win that race. But then we also now have the 2020 election and the right kind of going crazy after Donald Trump didn't win the presidential election. So how can we restore faith in our institutions again, in your opinion?
Sometimes you never really know what people are going to do until they're really tested. But I think you really want to look for people that have character. You listen to what they want their policies to be. And then just, are they calm? Are they rational? It makes common sense? And that's what you're looking for. Now, your common sense may be different than my common sense. Depends on what side of the aisle you're on, perhaps, right? But you're really looking at, does this person, would I be proud if they were my state house representative? Would I be proud if this person was my state senator, my county commissioner, my mayor, my U.S. senator, my congressperson? Or are they just trying to get likes and hits on Twitter and things like that? Because eventually that stuff's going to fade away. You really want people of solid substance. It's as simple as that, but it requires wisdom and discernment to try and sort through that.
Thank you for joining us, sir. You spoke in your opening remarks about how Congress should in some ways be more like the Rotary Club, where people leave their grievances at the door and take truth and a sense of unity in creating their policies. And yet, at the same time, Congress is tasked with debating these law bills and issues that are important to the everyday American, and we can't say that because healthcare or abortion is a contentious topic, we shouldn't discuss it. So how do we act like the Rotary Club without failing to do our duty?
Because we talk about the issue, not the person. So if you have a different position than me on whatever those contentious things are, let's talk about the substance of that issue, not start dog cussing each other like we did somewhere in high school, maybe in first year of college, where you start saying, oh, you're stupid if you think that. No, you believe what you believe and you came to it honestly. I believe what I believe and I came to it honestly. And so we have to have those deep, hard conversations, but you have to do it with respect. I understand where you're coming from, but it's really the skill of debating. And you can actually go through that in a lot of colleges and universities. And I hopefully, the Buckley program has ones on debating. How can, Bill Buckley do firing line, and he's having these conversations with people. You pull up the old, reels of tape of that. But he was always respectful of the person, but he disagreed with you on policy. He was very erudite, you could say, but he was very respectful. And that's really what we have to do. Don't denigrate the other person. But this is why I believe this is a better way. So pick a topic, that what we believe in. How do we get things accomplished? But stay away from the personal pejoratives. And I saw a little bit of that last night. Just saying.
Thanks for coming. On the topic of efficiency, what are you and the governor doing to ensure that Georgia can count ballots as fast as Florida? Florida's got twice the population, and even before it was R+17, you could go to bed knowing Florida's count. You can't do that with Georgia anymore. Secondly, on the topic of truth, given what we know Georgia's voting laws are and are not, what are you and the governor doing to make sure the All-Star game comes back to the Battery?
To answer your first question, that he's referring to SB 202. When we passed SB 202, I've been out defending that. It wasn't a perfect bill. There's a few things in there I wouldn't have put, like removing me as the state election board chairman. But that said, we've got photo ID for all forms of voting now. Lines have to be shorter than 1 hour. And you have to count all your ballots or know how many outstanding ballots you have before you can leave that night. Now, little known fact, thank you for the question. Did you know in 2020 we actually counted our ballots faster than Florida? Florida did not finish their 100% with their 100% counting of all their ballots until after us. The reason it didn't matter in Florida because they were so +7, plus whatever. It's a very red state. We had to count all of our ballots, and it wasn't until we had all of our ballots in we could finally say, this is what the results are. It's like going out to Montana. You can call that race before you even start counting because you know it's going to be it's going to be a red state. And you go to Massachusetts, you probably know. We'll let you know, but, and so we actually counted ours faster, and we counted ours faster than many other states. So that's a little known fact. It's just that we had to count every single one of them. We had to wait for all of our overseas, our UOCAVA, overseas ballots, and they could come in by Friday by 12 o'clock. And so that's really what the delay was. And you had another question in there, I think, too. What are we going to do? I'm sorry that we lost it. No one ever called me. I would have loved to have talked to Delta and all those big companies and say, hey, you got this wrong. I think they finally realized after the 2022 cycle that we have fair and honest elections in Georgia. We had fair and honest elections in 2020. And it was just another piece of disinformation, misinformation. But the sweet justice was that Stacey Abrams did not win in 2022.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for your remarks today and for the example of public service that you're showing us. I'd like to ask you about, there's a legal movement on now about alleging or interpreting the Constitution as giving the legislatures absolute power over the administration of elections. And I'd like to know your position on that and whether, and also your assessment of the credibility of that claim as a constitutional matter.
Well, as a structural engineer, I'll let the Supreme Court decide that one. I'm just guessing it's probably not going to get legs on it, and it probably is not going to get through there. I think that our motto in Georgia is wisdom, justice, moderation. And it's moderation in a good way. It doesn't mean Casper milquetoast. It really means that you're going to be thoughtful, considerate, do your due diligence. And I think when they really look at it, I think that they'll probably come to a position that's probably not supported in the Constitution for that. But we'll just wait and see what they say and do. And I look forward to seeing their decision.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm curious, you've mentioned or spoken about the need for Secretary of States to focus and heed to their oath of office, the Constitution, the law, but you run as a Republican. So I'm sort of curious, like, what is the value of running with a political party? I know, of course, we have a two-party system, and that's sort of built into the fabric of the country, but would you support getting rid of party affiliation for secretaries of state if that were possible? And if not, why run with a party? What is the value in that?
Well, in Georgia, you have to run with a party, so that's how we're set up. And so that's kind of the cards we're dealt with. But we're very similar to really the county sheriffs. A lot of the sheriffs in Georgia say, we don't know why we have to run as a party, but we really, when we're enforcing the law, we're just enforcing the law. It doesn't matter what party we're in. That's kind of how we are. But it is what it is. But as it relates to elections, it truly is nonpartisan, like bipartisan. We're just making sure we have honest and fair elections. Our county election directors, I know that somewhere on this side of the aisle, somewhere there, some I don't really know, but they're just doing their job. And so that's what you really are looking for. But we do see sometimes things a little bit differently. See, I believe in photo ID. I think everyone should. In fact, we actually poll tested in Georgia. Did you know that 70% of all Democrats, 93% of all Republicans, 78% of all African Americans believe only American citizens should vote in our elections? Even 56% of all progressives. I don't think we have anyone here that, but just so you know, your progressive buddies, 56% of them, the majority of them believe that only Americans should vote in our elections. I think it's common sense. I think photo ID, it's common sense. It gives you security. It doesn't put any undue burden on people. Everyone's got ID. Who here doesn't have ID? Anyone? You got student ID. That would work with photo ID. You could vote in Georgia. That's the kind of things that we're talking about. So I think there's just common sense things. I like early voting. I know in Connecticut it's new, but it gives people opportunities to vote and it helps our counties run the elections. So there are a lot of things that we can do. I think having lines shorter than an hour. But other states do things differently, and sometimes that is because you might see differently or you get your orders from high command. I got my orders from common sense, and so that's why I look at what makes sense, what provides the proper balance with accessibility and security. I know there's a tension there, but accessibility with security, because when you have both, you have confidence in the results.
Thanks very much for coming, and thank you for what you did, even if you think anyone should have done it. I'm not sure anyone would have, so I really respect that. On this point of common sense and voter ID laws, you said you have some studies that show it doesn't reduce turnout. I could show you studies that says it does reduce turnout. It's like wine, and some health nutrition studies say a glass a day is good for you, a glass a day is bad for you. I mean, I don't think we can know because there's a lot of contradictory evidence. But with voter ID, it seems common sense to me that some people don't have it, and if they don't have it, they're not going to be able to vote. So why is that common sense wrong? And if you think it reduces turnout, but it's worth it for security, then that's fine. I just wish we would say that.
No. In Georgia, we allow 8 forms of identification. About 98.5% of all Georgians have a driver's license. Then you also can have a military ID card, any government-issued ID card, student ID card. There's 8 forms of identification. If you have none of that, the state will provide that for you for free. Both political parties will make sure that you can get your ID. And what we've done, and we've found, we have now had 4 million people show up in 2018, 5 million for a presidential race in 2020, and now we have had 4.1, 4.2 million show up a year ago. Our percentage of voting population has gone up as a percentage of our registered voters. We're not where Massachusetts is now. I think they're still the record leader. But if you look at where we were 10 years, 15 years ago, and it's just shown that we have, and it's 1 1/4 law that it does not decrease, voter participation. But if you look at all the forms of identification, it was less than 200,000 people that potentially could have that situation, and they all could have access to it, and we will supply that to them free of charge.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We had a guest at Yale recently, and they were a big proponent of online voting. What would you think about online voting being kind of put into our system?
Good question. So during the course of all of our lawsuits that we had, we pulled in experts all the time. And so I asked this expert that we had, he's out there, I think it was, may have been Pitt Cyber, but it was a university in Pennsylvania. And the gentleman looked at me. I said, what do you think about online voting? He kind of looked at me. He said, well, Brad, kind of when you and I fade off in the sunset, I'm thinking, I'm not 75 years old yet, buddy. But he said, the younger generation, they're going to demand it because they're used to that form of voting. He said, but right now it's not secure enough. Once we can really handle and get our hands on the security part, then you'll actually be doing that. And then he said, it's pretty interesting. If you do that, the upside of that also is that if you ever have voter coercion, in other words, your best friend or the union boss or boss hog that owns the whole town or whatever that is, says, who'd you vote for? You could pull up your phone and say, I voted for Mary. I voted for Bob. And if you really don't want to vote for him, but you want to get this person off your back, you could change it online up until 7 p.m. He says it actually put the voter in place that they could not be coerced in who they wanted to vote for because you control that with your iPhone. So that's an interesting perspective. He said, but right now we don't have the security. Give us another 10 years and we can revisit it. That's a good question.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So you mentioned earlier how election denial made its way onto Fox frequently, and you got a lot of texts. I'm just wondering what you think the media's responsibility is in these sorts of situations. It's like a loaded question, but what should they do? How should they function? When we have something like election denial going on.
You have to decide if you're going to be a news station or if it's just talk radio or talk TV. And then obviously there's some ongoing lawsuits, and we'll see where that goes in a court of law. And so there are some standards that they're held to. But I would think that people need to understand, you're not just talking to your crowd, you're really talking to the entire country, no matter what media it is. And I think it's really important that we deal with things appropriately, not just trying to spin people up, and make sure we have the facts.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. So I understand this is a lecture on the future of American elections. However, I wanted to get your insight on what we could do to fix, or what countries that are facing corruption and fraudulent elections, what can they do and implement into their systems, like Venezuela, whose elections have been fraudulent for over 20 years. What do they need to do in order to fix their elections and restore said democracy in these countries?
They got to decide that they want to change. They got to get so sick and tired of being sick and tired that they just say, we're going to make a change. This isn't working. Because we go ahead and we jam the ballot box over for this team, then we go ahead and jam it over here for the other team, and you're almost at virtual civil war. It's not healthy. It holds the country's growth back. Go back, probably 80 to 100 years ago, Argentina per capita, national income per capita was not that far off of the United States. Look where it is now. That's what happens when you have bad politics. In fact, if we really fixed our house, we could get rid of this 2% growth and we'd have 4% growth. And that doesn't sound like a lot. Oh, it is a lot because it gets compounded every year. And so the more we can work together on a common vision, common purpose, the more we could get done as Americans. I know that the Carter Center and other organizations have gone out that. There's actually, there's a Republican organization. It has the name Republican, but it means big Republican, not Republican Party, if that makes sense. The idea of a Republican election integrity project that has gone overseas, and there's people from Georgia that participate in that. I know the Carter Center does that. But you have to actually get invited in. Some countries don't want you in because they've got the ballot box stuffed with their people, and that's just the issue. We made a decision, and we were the first country to really get it right in 1776, that we the people would decide our form of government. And that eventually spread throughout the entire world, and now we have the Western democracies, we have Japan, we have Taiwan, Australia, it's spreading bit by bit. It's a painful process. We don't always get it right, but I'm really hopeful about the future, and you should be too.
You, like a good engineer, you endorsed early voting for its efficiency. Now, I'd like your opinion. People who vote early and who, by voting early, take the information that comes after they vote and before the election out of the possibility of influencing them. Is there any evidence, or do you have an opinion on whether people who vote early are less informed than people who vote on election day?
No. We've shown that it's not really been, an issue in Georgia. I know that in Connecticut, they're worried about that. What happens if something happens, like the weekend before, and already people have voted? What happens, in some state, and you wonder if that person is capable of really doing the job? I'm not saying any names. I know what you're saying. But by and large, it just gives people an opportunity to vote, and that's a free will decision they make. And probably they're committed to that cause or that party already, and they're not going to change no matter what happens. And we've just not seen it as an issue, but I hear what you're saying. And that's public policy, and you have those conversations on both sides.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your time for coming here. With the rise in political extremism and instability, not just here in the U.S., but just like throughout the world the last several decades, what are your thoughts, or have you considered levers that could be pulled to to reduce that? More specifically, whether it's at the ballot box and considering other forms of for people to vote, such as ranked choice voting, or whether it's considering other models. And this might be a bit of a stretch, but it's done elsewhere, like especially in Europe, with proportional representation.
Well, Nebraska does, you could say, proportional representation. What they do with their congressional seats, it's a little bit different. So they did it at the state level. The states are the incubators of great ideas. It hasn't left Nebraska, so maybe it's not something the other 49 states want to do. But the system we have, although it's not perfect, eventually the voice of the people is heard. And when things get so wild and crazy, the voice of the people is heard. And they reject people that are so far out of the mainstream that the people eventually come back to something. So you start seeing in Massachusetts, Baker, was a Republican and he had 2 terms. And he really had successful 2 terms. You look in Maryland, Hogan in a very blue state had 2 terms, very successful. So it can happen. And so that's really, is the best, guardian, is people really caring about their vote and caring more about the direction of their state than the direction of a political party. If things get so out of kilter, then you can reestablish and get it back to more something that reflects your values.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I wanted to ask you about kind of a historical hypothetical concerning the 1960 election. There's concerns or suspicion that in Chicago there was some shady business going on with the votes being counted there, and Richard Nixon decided not to ultimately use the edifice to challenge the electoral results in Illinois. My question is, do you think he should have? And I know this is kind of hypothetical, so it's tough. But and do you think when politicians do use these edifices to try to understand, the truth behind the election process, do you think it's hurtful to the rhetoric of politics in the country? And do you think it's worth it?
Well, I think most, if you're honest with yourself, most people probably know what happened in Chicago. Let's keep it real. It's one of those kind of questions, what do you do? That's why I believe that every state should have its electoral votes and it bubbles up. Because there's been machines. For years and years there was a machine in one state and it was actually run by Republicans. For years and years there's machines with big cities that have been run by the other side. So it's happened on both sides. And you and I could say, well, it happened more on their side than the other side. But at least we need to work on improving the process. Unfortunately, it is what it is, but they don't understand. It really starts tearing apart the social fabric. And that gets down to their personal integrity. They don't care, because all they cared about what's in it for them. And it's distressing. It's un-American. But it is what you can do. And society's never going to be perfect, because we're not perfect. If we're perfect, we'd still be living in the garden. And we're not in the garden. So we have things that just happen. We do the best with what we have. We keep on striving to be better. And that's why your generation's so important. Because when you see this stuff, don't become a hypocrite. Make the decision, I'm not going to go there. Because you will be challenged to go to those places. And all of us get challenged at the time. Make the right decision.
Well, with that, I hope you all join me in thanking Secretary Raffensperger for being with us today.
Thank you.